Hi guys, it's Scott here. Welcome back to the bunker. Recently I participated in I Am A WARGAMER. It's like an online challenge to talk about how you got involved in wargaming and a few other things. And as a consequence of that video, I've received a lot of requests asking about post-traumatic stress disorder, because in the video I talked about the fact that the reason I started my YouTube channel, one of the reasons was because I found it therapeutic in dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And so as a consequence of those requests, I've produced this video basically to explain what is post-traumatic stress disorder, how does it affect people, and in particular, how does it affect someone who is a wargamer? Because some people have implied or suggested to me that they find it odd that someone who is a veteran who has post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as a consequence of their military service, how could they then participate in a pastime that is that relates or harkens to the kind of activities that resulted in the condition presenting. So that's what I'm about in this video. So that's what we're going to talk about, or what I'm going to talk about in this video. What I want to stress right from the start is I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just someone who's been diagnosed with PTSD. This doesn't give me any more insight than someone who has been shot in the head claiming to be capable of conducting brain surgery. It just doesn't work that way. There's plenty of resources online. You can go on YouTube and you can find a whole bunch of videos on PTSD. Some are good, some are just not, like, no, just wrong. First of all, I'll explain PTSD to how the way it was explained to me when I was diagnosed. Essentially, we're all geared. There's a part within our brain that governs our fight or flight reactions. And essentially, what happens is whenever we find ourselves in a position where we feel physically threatened, a little switch flicks on in our brain, and we suddenly become hyper vigilant, hyper aware. Our senses tend to some dull and some get better. For example, your peripheral vision tends to narrow, and your sense of hearing might improve. Long story short, you go from just being relaxed to, like, okay, this shit's going down. And so that's how your brain deals with threats. So this little switch in your brain, there's a threat, it gets flicked on. The threat goes away, it gets flicked off. So you can relax again and go about your daily business. Someone with PTSD, essentially, is what happened is that switch has come on, and it's been flicked on just one time too many, and it stays on. And so it becomes very difficult for someone who has PTSD to relax, or to not be, vigilant. Now, the symptoms of PTSD will present differently in different people. For example, some people will experience flashbacks if they have PTSD. Other people won't experience flashbacks at all. For example, I don't suffer from flashbacks. I've never had a flashback, ever. And there's a good reason for that. PTSD can be triggered or caused by either one singular horrific event, or it can be the consequence of protracted events over a long period of time, and anything in between. So one horrific event, a series of threats over a long time, or maybe 2 or 3 horrible events, and so the list goes on. Now, the way it presents itself it can present itself in different ways. Like I said, you can have flashbacks, you can have, you'll experience hypervigilance, restlessness, anxiety, inability to sleep, a low tolerance for things that, like, basically low tolerance for things that you deem, the sufferer, as is stupid. So you see someone doing something that you deem to be foolish, and that will anger you. You'll be quick to anger. You'll be quick. You tend to be restless and very irritable. So these are some of the things that present. Oh, and also easily startled. You know, like, it doesn't take much. Someone can drop a book and it'll make you flinch or jump. And so people will suffer these or present in different ways. For example, in my case, I was hypervigilant. I was very irritable. I could not sleep. I went for a period of about 2 years where I would get maybe 2 to 3 hours sleep a night. And then that would go on for about a fortnight, and then I would just crash. And I'd come home from work, I'd sit on the couch in my lounge room at 6 p.m. in the evening, and I would just simply fall asleep, and then I would wake up 12 hours later, and then repeat. 2 weeks of no sleep or very little sleep. For example, I would go to bed, just a way of an example, I would normally go to bed around about 11 o'clock at night. I would then stare at the ceiling until around about midnight, and then I would fall asleep. And then every morning, regular as clockwork, within a 5-minute window, I would wake up at 3 a.m. every night, and then I would not be able to get back to sleep. And so I would lie there for a couple of hours, and then at 5 a.m. I'd just go, I'm getting up. And that would go on for 2 weeks. Fall asleep at midnight, wake up at 3 a.m. Fall asleep at midnight, wake up at 3 a.m. Fall asleep at midnight, wake up at 3 a.m. That would go for 2 weeks. And then, like I said, 6 p.m., fall asleep, and then wake up 6 p.m. the next day. And that was just due to sheer exhaustion. And we figured out why that was the case when I was admitted to a psych ward. And it turns out it's actually quite understandable. When I was in Afghanistan, I would not go to bed, or I'd not put my head down and go to sleep until midnight every night because of the work. Like, there was things to be done. And then at 3 a.m., I would always get up. So I'd set my watch for an alarm at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get up. The reason I would do that is I would then go out to where the soldiers were on picket points or guard duty, all right, trying to keep it simple in city terms, doing guard duty, and I would go out to those strong points and I'd just check on the soldiers. I just, come up to them and say, hey guys, how's things going? Yeah. And then I would go to bed. And I did that because I wanted the soldiers to know that there was someone in the chain of command, the leadership, that was, also like 3 o'clock in the morning, this sucks. Oh, hang on, the Sergeant Major's up, so hey, if he's doing it. And then I'd go back to I'd throw my head down at 3:30 and I'd fall back to sleep. And so we figured out that if what my brain was doing, it was saying to me, even though I was back home in Australia, my brain was still back in Afghanistan. My brain was still saying, it's midnight, you don't go to sleep until midnight. And then my brain would wake me at 3 a.m. saying, hey, you've got to get up and go check on the strong points. And you don't get to go back to sleep until you've done that. So there was this disconnect between where my physical location, where I was, and where my mind was. So that's a classic example of how PTSD can affect different people. And the other thing, of course, was I was extremely irritable when I came home because there were things that were being done in the environment around me back home that if it had been done back on operations, whether in the Middle East or Afghanistan, those kind of things could imperil or endanger life. For example, a mess, things not being tidy. Soldiers, believe it or not, even on operations, are extremely tidy individuals. The reason for this is because you need to know where all your stuff is at instantaneously. If you're stripping your rifle, or if you're laying your kit out to have a shave, or whatever, and then suddenly the shit hits the fan, you've got to be able to gather that crap up really quick and get your butt into gear. Now, if you come into an environment where there is what you perceive as chaos or just normal daily clutter, this is a big issue, because your brain is saying this is potentially dangerous. So it's a completely irrational behavior when viewed from a perspective of someone in a perfectly safe environment. They look at the situation and they go, what the hell is your problem? Okay, there's some cups and saucers still on the kitchen table, or the vacuum cleaner hasn't been put away. What's the big deal? The big deal is that your brain is still your mind is in a place where, well, this is clutter. This shouldn't be lying around here. Things need to be put away. And it really is, it's horrific, man, because you're raging against the world around you. You're trying to produce order in an environment where it's not required. So that's just two examples of how PTSD presents. The lack of sleep and this disdainful disorder. Okay, and so there are other issues with it as well, and this is one that's not particularly good. Is it causes in you sometimes it will present as just a deep sadness. So there will be times where you'll just become very, very sad. And I remember, and this was before I was admitted to the psych ward, before we came to the conclusion there was something not quite right with Scott. I remember watching, there was a mini-series called The Tudors, and in that there's a scene where the guy who's playing, if you haven't seen The Tudors, watch it, it's great. There's a scene where Henry VIII is dying, and in that scene he's sitting on his throne or a chair somewhere. I don't think it's his throne, it's probably just a chair, and he's dying, and as he's dying he's thinking about being in this rose garden and a knight come along and hacking all the roses down. It's quite an interesting scene. And I was watching this and I just started crying. I just started bawling my eyes out. And fortunately I was by myself at the time, so I wasn't embarrassed by it, but I was crying, and I thought to myself, what the hell is wrong with me? I mean, like, seriously. So anyway, that was another thing. So you can be very, very sad. And the other thing, of course, is and one of the other things is you lose something. You lose all the things that you're passionate about, or things that interest you. You suddenly become disinterested in. For example, for me, wargaming. I just didn't want to play war games anymore, and I didn't want to play any games anymore. And I mean, think about it. Humans like to play games. I mean, that's how we learn to socialize. Children, when we are children, we play games. Why do we play games? Oh, because they're fun. No, we play games because it's a mechanism by which we learn to socialize. We learn to get along with other people by playing games. We soon learn that if you take the ball and don't share it with anyone, people conclude that you're a dickhead. So we're conditioned to play games. Anyway, yeah, so you lose interest in the things that you're passionate about, and you become sad, and the list goes on. There's a whole bunch of things. Emotional numbness. You suddenly find it difficult to feel close or compassion or caring for other people. Nightmares. I used to get nightmares, but I actually got night terrors, because I never got to sleep long enough to have a nightmare. But when I had these periods of where every now and then I would get a solid 12 hours of sleep, and I didn't realize this, I would have these night terrors where I'd just be screaming and carrying on. That's why my wife used to leave me when I fall asleep in the lounge room on the couch. She would let me sleep there, because if she would wake me and bring me to my bed, I would scream and carry on during the night, and that would ruin her night's sleep as well. Yeah, and the only other thing is that, yeah, addictive behaviour. So there are certain things that you might become very addicted to. This is why guys that have problems with alcohol, things tend to get worse for them. Now, fortunately for me, I didn't really drink. I never did. And so that never manifested, but it can lead to substance abuse and the like. So anyway, that's PTSD from my perspective. Like I said, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, and how it has presented in me is different to how it might present in other people. But in summary, remember, it's things like emotional numbness, inability to sleep, nightmares or night terrors, anxiety, extreme restlessness, easily startled, loss of interest or passions, impassions, addictive behavior, low tolerance, inability, irritability, quick to anger. That's always another one, quick to anger, and repressive memories. Repressive memories is basically you try to shut out the things that that led to your post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, that's not one of those things I have. I can remember all my deployments, all the things that I saw, all the things I did. What's interesting is, prior to my last deployment, I think what set me up for failure somewhat was the fact that I had my sister succumb to cancer, and my brother and I looked after her while she died. And then 3 months later, my brother died. And then 3 months after that, I had a soldier in a training accident get shot through both arms, and I had to deal with that. And then 3 months after that, my mother died. So it was a pretty horror year, yeah. And then my final deployment to Afghanistan, and that was an interesting one. There was some pretty ghastly things that happened there on that one. But that's it. So that's PTSD. That's how it can present in individuals. I can only give you the perspective from my perspective. I can only tell you about PTSD from my perspective, and my PTSD is not anybody else's PTSD. It's my PTSD, and with that, it's my PTSD. So in other words, it's my problem. Often people with PTSD, actually that's unfair, maybe not often, sometimes people with PTSD will behave very poorly, and they will use PTSD as an excuse why they behave poorly. Now, I can understand this to a point where someone who's not been diagnosed with PTSD is behaving poorly, but once you're diagnosed and you know what the problem is, you should also, hopefully, and it's certainly the case in my case, you get taught how to manage it. So, like any problem that you have, it's your problem. And so you own it and you manage it and you don't inflict it on other people. It's one thing to ask or request empathy from people, to ask them to try and understand what your issues are. It's another thing completely to use your issues as a cudgel to beat people with. That's not cool. So, but that's just my 5 cents worth. Anyway, my problem. And at least I don't have cancer. At least I don't have multiple sclerosis. I mean, God, of all the things I could be inflicted with, PTSD, I can manage that. That's cool. I can deal with that. Okay, now, wargaming. Why doesn't it cause a problem? Well, quite simply for this reason. It's a game. It's not real. None of the things that contributed to my post-traumatic stress disorder revolved around a game, miniatures. There are plenty of historical examples of guys who have been to war and yet stalwarts of wargaming. Brigadier Young, geez, I can't think of his first name. Young, I know him as Brigadier Young. He developed lots of wargame rules. He was a veteran of the Second World War. I believe he was a commando and an officer in the Royal Marine Commandos, and yet he wargamed happily right up until his final days, is my understanding. So specifically, how does wargaming help with dealing with PTSD? One of the ways you can control PTSD or mitigate against it is a thing called mindfulness. And essentially, all that really is just finding something that you can immerse yourself in, something that will distract you from the things that are around you that might trigger a reaction because of the PTSD. And so there's all the aspects of wargaming, not just playing the game, but all the research that you do, especially if you're a historical gamer, I guess. The painting the miniatures, building the models, building the terrain. All these things combine make for quite an immersive kind of experience. As a consequence of that, that helps deal with the PTSD. The thing is, miniatures, I don't associate war games with reality. I'd like to get my war games to be as realistic as they can, but it's not real. The only way that this could, miniature wargaming could somehow contribute to my post-traumatic stress disorders if one day Scott was playing a war game and then someone came up and shot him in the chest. Okay, at that point maybe I can have some kind of mental association between miniatures on a table and something traumatic, but that's not been the case. It's never been the case. And in actual fact, when I was on deployment, one of the ways that I would get some kind of, one of the things I would do in my own personal time when you did have it, like every now and then, is I would read about war games and stuff like that, because it was a thing I'd contemplate, when I get back home from this deployment, I might purchase some of these new Perry Napoleonic Confederation of the Rhine troops. They look really cool. I wouldn't mind gaming them, with a brigade of the Confederation of the Rhine, and the Perry miniatures are just oh so sweet. And I can combine that with sharp practice, two fat laddies, that's the kind of rules I'll probably use, or maybe General d'Armée. So the point is, that was something that was a distraction from what I was doing. It wasn't a cause of my grief or my hypervigilance. So that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else to touch on other than to say it's perfectly possible to be a wargamer and suffer from or being diagnosed with PTSD. I don't like using the word suffer from PTSD. I'm not suffering. I've been diagnosed with PTSD and it causes some issues, but I'm not suffering from it. That said, I know some people are, and so Godspeed to them. There's one other thing that probably worth mentioning is the fact that a lot of guys, well, I shouldn't say guys, a lot of people, well, God forbid a lot of people who have PTSD succumb to it, and by that I mean they kill themselves because they don't see any way of dealing with it, and it's just too horrible to live with, and so they do what they do. Again, and this has been a recurring thing for me. I am profoundly blessed. Some people would say profoundly lucky, whatever. Insofar as that, when my PTSD presented and manifested, I was married to a woman who really stuck by me. So my wife just basically saved my life. So I was really lucky in that regard. So yeah, one of the things with PTSD is it's very difficult to, it's a thing that is exceptionally difficult, I think, to deal with by yourself. I think you need, unless you're just some really kind of super strong individual, I think it really helps to have someone help you with it. And so for me, I mean, being in the Australian Army, I was very fortunate because we have, and I'm sure there'll be people who disagree, but this is my opinion and this has been my experience. So in my opinion and in my experience, the medical support that I got post-deployment, when I was diagnosed, when they discovered that I had a problem, was exceptional. It was really good. I mean, I remember the day that I was diagnosed, well, not diagnosed, but went down that path, is I was a regimental sergeant major at the School of Artillery, and I had taken soldiers who had presented with PTSD symptoms. I had taken them to our psych, the psychological officer, and then they would be helped. And I remember one day I went up to see my doctor, just the GP type doctor at the base, about my knees, because my knees are just they're shit. And I remember her saying to me, "You seem really angry, RSM." And I remember saying to her, "Well, I'm the RSM. I'm always angry." And at the same time, the psychological officer was there, and I remember looking to him, turning to him, and saying, you know, and I just thought these two doctors were just having a chin wag, as they do, and I just said, "Oh, so hey," you know, and I said to the psych officer, "G'day, how you doing, sir? I've got no one for you today." And he said to me, "Yeah, but I'm here for you, actually." And he said to me, you, like the doctor said, you seem angry." I said, "Oh, I'm a bit irritable, I'm tired." He then said to me, "Why are you so tired?" I said, "Well, I haven't slept properly in about 2 years." And that's when they went, "Okay." And yeah, I did 32 years in the Army. One final observation: the British Army, the Brits, they let their enlisted men serve for 22 years, and then they either discharge or they move them into officer positions. And those officer positions tend to be ones that are no longer more in a training type environment, as opposed to let's go up to the sharp end. I could never understand why the Brits did that. But now I think I know. I think it's because they understand that maybe there's only so much time in which you can keep pitching men into war before you break them, or they just basically get out. Yeah, you can only flog a horse so much, I guess. So anyway, yeah. So that's it, guys. Like I said, I've only put this together because I've had a lot of requests for it, and I remember when I was doing my post-traumatic stress disorder management course, the Army puts you on when you get diagnosed. They offer you this course that you can go on to help manage post-traumatic stress disorder. And there was a young soldier on the course with me. There was me and about 6 other soldiers, and they were all quite surprised when they found out I was a regimental sergeant major. And I remember one lad saying to me, "Gee, sir, you need to talk to people about this, because it's when soldiers find out that even RSMs get PTSD, maybe they won't think there's so much of a stigma attached to it." And I don't see any stigma attached to it. If I had my leg blown off, I'd have to have dealt with that. If I had got shot through the chest and had a sucking chest wound, I'd have had to have dealt with that. And if I'd got shot in the head, I would have had to have dealt with that. So this is just another related injury, or maybe even wound. I don't know. Anyway, that's all. We'll wrap up there.